So today's presentation, I've been looking into RAID, which stands for Redundant Array of Independent Disks, or Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks. And you can see here on the picture, there are lots of different hard drives put together. So it's a collection of those put together. So that's an example of what a RAID would look like. But before talking about RAID, there's some things to introduce. So we'll be looking today on what a hard drive is, and then once we've looked at the two types of hard drives that I'm going to talk about, we'll be looking how to format that hard drive, how to organize it using something called a basic disk and a dynamic disk. And then after that, we'll be looking at RAID types, and dynamic disks are used a lot in RAID types. So we'll be looking at different types of that using dynamic disks. And then at the end, if there's any questions, feel free to ask me. So first of all, what is a hard drive or a hard disk drive? So this one's a magnetic hard drive, and as you can see on this bit here, the disk, it spins around, and this angular arm here, it can read and write data depending on what you want to do. And data is in files, pictures, videos, operating systems. So you can store more or less a lot of things, including programs on there. So this was introduced in 1956, so it has been around for a long time, and it is still being used today. Something to note here is that you can get different speeds. So you can get a hard drive like this going at 5,400 RPM, 7,200 RPM, 10,000 RPM. And you'll see a lot of hard drives commonly at around 7,200 RPM. And anything above 10,000 or more can be used, but another hard drive called a solid state drive can be used for that as well. So it's not as common. And the advantage of this is that it's quite cheap. So this is the other type of hard drive, the solid state drive, and this is the one my computer uses. And the advantage with this one is that there's got no moving parts inside. And it also has a fast data transfer speed. It uses something called flash memory. So that's why reading and writing data, in other words, saving files on or opening files on your computer, is a lot faster. And the other advantage is it's quiet. With the other hard drive, it's got a disk, an angular arm, so it does make a bit of noise, and it's more energy efficient because there's less moving parts. It's also more resistant. With physical damage to the hard drive, with the magnetic one, you can erase all your data. So this one offers a bit more resistance, but still not foolproof. All hard drives have the chance of losing data on, and it's generally more expensive. So this type of hard drive is useful when you want to access a lot of programs frequently. If I wanted to have more space but just store information and data on without accessing it, the magnetic hard drive will be a better option because it's cheaper and you can have a lot more space on there. So talking about those types of hard drives, there's a way to, let's say, format it or organize that hard drive in a way. And we'll be talking about basic and dynamic disks. And it's a way of formatting or changing and organizing the hard drive that best suits you. So what a basic disk does is it has partitions. And you can imagine dividing up your hard drive into a maximum of 4 sections, because only 4 partitions are allowed on a basic disk as a maximum number. And just imagine each partition being a separate drive. These are called logical drives. So C drive, D drive, E drive, and F drive is just an example for this. So advantages for doing this method. Well, you could dual boot an operating system. If you have Windows on your operating system and you want to use Kali Linux or another type of operating system, you can do using this type of method. Another thing you could do, you could hide a disk. So you create your partitions and you hide one of the disks. If you, let's say, you want information on there hidden, or you're sharing a computer with family members and you've got important work, you don't want people using that same account, you can hide a disk on there with some information on. And you can separate your operating system to the programs and files that you've got on your disk. So, for example, you could put your programs and files on the C drive and an operating system on the drive. Now, why do this? Well, you could, if you have some sort of malware attack on your operating system and you could do a clean install, so get rid of it and reinstall the operating system again without affecting your programs and files on the other hard drives, or the logical disks, shall I say. So this has been around for some time as well, so it's a fairly simple kind of method, and it's compatible with all the Windows operating systems. Oh, and another thing to note, you can use one of these partitions, let's say like the D drive here, as a recovery disk, and that will assist you if you have any errors with your computer system. And this is an example of what my laptop disk management looks like. So I'm using a solid state drive, and this is it here, and it's partitioned into 3 sections. So it's using a basic disk, as you can see on the left here, and it's got a system partition, and it's got where I put my programs and files, and then it's got the recovery partition that we just mentioned before. So one thing to notice here is that not all partitions need a letter next to them. So I can't, in terms of access, I don't really have accessibility to access the system partition and the recovery partition using the on this computer section. So you would see the C drive here, but I could technically divide this into another partition and have a C drive and a D drive, dividing that up there. So what are the limitations? Well, you can still get physical disk damage, and with the physical disk damage, you could lose all your data. So even if you partitioned it off or broke it into separate sections, you could lose all that data through damage of the disk. The other thing is insufficient partition space. When you divide your hard drive into 4 sections using partitions, it's sometimes if you want to put programs on one drive, you could easily fill that space up, where if you separating it out, another drive might have a lot of space on. So that's something to think about when using a basic disk. The other thing is keeping track of files. Since you're saving them into different locations or logical drives or partitions, you manually need to change that. So you can put your Word documents on the C drive, videos on the D drive, and it's a very manual type of task that you're doing. And you could think that is it really needed to have so many, more than 3 or 4 partitions is needed. You could easily create folders. And as I mentioned before, physical disk damage. You're just using one hard drive or one solid state drive, so you can lose all that data. And for this here, it's just an example of just to help give you an understanding of what a logical disk is. So when you break these partitions up, you are, on this example, C, D, E, and F, you have 4 logical disks. So you're using one hard drive, but you've got 4 logical disks because you broke it up into 4 sections. Now, a dynamic disk, it works a bit differently, and the main thing to notice here is that it doesn't just use one disk, it uses 2 or more, and they're integrated in a way to create one logical disk. So it's like sticking them all together to combine into one, whether the basic disk was dividing it into 4. And we'll talk about the advantages of doing this in a minute. But when they do that, it's called a volume. And as I mentioned, it combines the use of one or more disks, and they are integrated. And this is something that RAID looks at. Since RAID uses a lot of disks, they normally look at dynamic disks. But first of all, let's have a look at a dynamic disk type called a spanned volume. So this uses 2 or more physical disks. And you can see here the files in this picture here. I've got files on the left hard drive, and files on the right. And that's just representing how much data I've put on that drive. And with the leftover space, you can merge that to create a virtual drive or another logical drive. So this creates space, and it's making use of the space that you've got left. It doesn't really offer any type of speed or redundancy features, but you are making use of that space if you want another logical drive. And yeah, it doesn't do anything to help protect you with data either, with data loss. So looking on why to use RAID. Well, you have the use of different types of hard drives you can combine together, and by doing this, RAID looks at different types of advantages. One of them is about increasing the speed, the performance. So in terms of reading and writing your data, or accessing your files or saving your files onto RAID or logical drive, it can be a lot faster. The other thing is fault tolerance, and it looks at the failure. It still looks at if one piece of the hard drive is, let's say for example, loses all its data, can it still function? Can it still perform? And the redundancy, it's like a safety net. So you lose all your data on one drive, what's plan B and C? How do you help reduce that loss? And so looking at the RAID types. So I know there's quite a lot of information here, but this bit here is called stripped volume or RAID 0. So when you hear these two terms, they basically mean the same thing. So RAID 0 looks at data being stripped between the disks, so it's spread out. So for an example here, I've got a picture of a dog, and when you, let's say, saving this picture onto your system, it's spread across 2 hard drives here. So I'm using 2 solid state drives, disk 0 or disk 1. Half that data has gone to disk 1, half the data has gone to disk 0. And what this does is, the advantage to this is that it has a good performance. You want to access that picture again, it will come twice as quick because there's only half the data to load on each drive. The disadvantage is it increases the chance of data loss. And if you think about it, if you have one hard drive on your computer and you lose that data, all the data on there, it's on one hard drive. So this doubles the chance, because if you lose one of your hard drives of your data, you can't access your other file on the other disk. because it can't load half of the data. It needs all the data in place. So you've got very good performance, but in terms of redundancy, it's not very good. It doubles the chance of losing your data because you're using 2 disks. So to combat this, there's a RAID called RAID 1, also known as a mirrored volume. And what this does, it duplicates the data. So when you're saving, let's say you've got the same picture of a dog, you're saving that picture onto this volume, mirrored volume, it just duplicates it. It's a backup. So if you lose one of your hard drives to data loss, you've got another backup you can use, and you can replace the hard drive and copy it back on. The disadvantage is that it uses a lot of space. If you have a terabyte of data that you want to back up, you need 2 terabytes because you're doubling the amount of data that you're saving. And it's not as fast as RAID 0. It doesn't offer any performance benefits. So this leads me on to RAID 5 volume. And this is a bit of both of best worlds, really. It kind of offers you some performance and some redundancy. And you need 3 disks or more for this type of method. So what this does, it strips your data again between the hard drives. And as you can see on this example, that half the data is on one, and the other half of data of the picture of the dog is on another. But it uses, so it's still fast, but it uses something called parity. And what this does, it basically knows what data that will go in that section if it goes missing. So as you can see here, let's say there's a data loss, one of the hard drives, and half of that data is lost. What the parity does, it checks, it knows what goes there, and it can recreate that. So if you lose one hard drive, you can install another, and what that does, it can recreate the image. It can of that dog there, so it can restore all the data. So if you lose one hard drive, it can restore it again. That's what parity does. Just a note here that parity does take some space. So if you have 2 terabytes of data that needs saving, parity will need an additional 1 terabyte. So it offers speed because you're dividing the data up between the hard drives, so it's quick access to writing and reading that picture. And it doesn't take as much space because your space is halved because of the parity. So it's the best of both worlds. Its advantage is that if you lose another hard drive, you lose all your data. This isn't quite common, but if you can imagine installing another hard drive and copying that data, it could take hours or up to a day or two to transfer all the data that you've got on one hard drive to another, and that's where the risk of another hard drive failure can come in. So how do we tackle this problem? Something called RAID 6. And what's to note here is that it works exactly the same as RAID 5 in a lot of ways. And you need 4 or more disks, and the data is just divided between the disks. The only difference here is that the parity is duplicated. So instead of having 1, you have 2. What this does is if you lose 2 of your hard drives, you can still back up and restore that data by using another hard drive. So you can easily restore that issue. And it does take up a bit of data, so because you're using parity, you're going to need to have a little bit more space. If you've got 2 terabytes of data needs saving, you need 2 terabytes of parity because you're duplicating it. And the other thing is the read performance is the same. So when accessing your file and you want to look at a document, the speed is the same, but when writing it, the speed is lower. So lastly, this is the last section. This is called a RAID 10. And on a RAID 10 is a combination of RAID 0 and RAID 1. Now, as we looked before, RAID 0 offers very good performance, but not very good in terms of redundancy. And RAID 1 offers no performance, but very good redundancy. So this is using the best of both. And this uses 4 or more drives. So for this example here, RAID 0 has good performance. So it divides your data up again, and it goes through the line onto RAID 1. And RAID 1 has the redundancy because it's duplicating the data. And so that's kind of how you get good performance and a way to increase the chance of your data not being lost. Because if you lose one, you can just duplicate it. The disadvantage is that it uses a lot of storage for this method, and it comes at a high cost as well. So if you've got the money to use this type of method and you want to invest into this, this is probably a really good system if you want speed, you want fast performance, and also redundancy. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully it's all a bit clear regarding what the RAIDs are. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for that. I particularly don't have any questions. I do have a topic of conversation, really.
Oh, yeah.
Based on all of these RAID and their different characteristics, I'm only considering what sort of technology, which one is best in a cloud environment, really. At these data centers, they would utilize one or more of these, strategies.
Oh, yeah,
it's
definitely.
just a fascinating concept, and I really like the fact that you were able to identify clearly the more disks you are using, so the more you have to pay for, and that follows the model that Azure, and I'm sure with Amazon, AWS, that they follow. So the more backup storage that you need, the more you have to pay for it. So it's very, very interesting to see that actually documented the way you have done it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's really interesting because you can see which offers. It's not just one advantage over the other. There's advantages and disadvantages for each one, and there's a cost as well. So it's finding one that works for you. But I can't imagine a lot of companies using something called RAID 0 because it offers no redundancy. So if you lose your data, that's it. But there are a lot of other RAIDs as well. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and some other double-digit ones. But these are just the main ones that I used. Yeah, so I've just picked the main bits out.
No, it's very good. This really makes it very clear.
Thank you.
The transition from disk to solid state drive, and to how these volumes are divided in such a way to allow us to have so much capacity, because we rarely think as users, box standard user, we rarely think about how it is done. We simply just access OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever, even the email facilities that we've been given, and we have the 15 gig free or 50 gig free or whatever.
Yeah.
So the data needs to be stored somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing you said about the parity is that that parity, being able to identify what data you had there before. There's also something called metadata.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, in the cloud environment, when you sign up to a cloud provider, let's say with Azure, let's use Azure. They've got two data centers in the UK, one up north and one down south. But when you save your data, where is it actually going? Right?
Yeah.
And you know, in a country as big as the US, you would expect your data to be as close to you as possible, but it may not be.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the case, but a worst case scenario might be that a cloud provider or any provider for that nature will give you access to storage, but it's stored somewhere else. Maybe it's stored in a part of the world that data is viewed to be a commodity to barter with,
Oh yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, because it's cheaper to perhaps host it there because
Yeah,
the
that could be.
infrastructure. Yeah, so I mean these things generate a lot of heat. These data centers, and to cool them down using water, aircon and so forth, is very expensive. Yeah,
Yes. Oh, that's true.
if you can find a way of holding that data somewhere, and for it to to then be cheaper, and then you can transfer that cost or less of a cost to your customers, then you would then start leading the market. And something just came to my mind, which is really interesting. Just something just popped into my mind.
Yeah.
The fact that trying to cool these hardware and all these processes down is cost a lot of money. And I know in America, um, the I think it's the Amazon one. I don't want to speak out of
Yeah.
turn with
Yeah. Sure.
Amazon's, but the water draft, they're running out of water. Basically, there's not enough to provide the local community, let alone to power their data centers. So the
That's it.
reservoirs are running low
Mm.
to quite a drastic point. Um, and my idea right now sounds a bit far-fetched, but
Yeah.
um, but humor me on this. The fact that the air is cooler the further up you go into
Yes. Yeah.
space. Yeah, so there's the stratosphere, and there's
Mm.
really really cold. We see that with airlines, don't we? When
Yeah.
the
That's true.
airplanes are flying up at those
Mm.
altitudes, even not attitude, altitudes, then it's pretty cold, and the
Oh
pressure is
yeah.
different.
Mm.
So I mean, it's not beyond us. Elon Musk is on the
Yeah.
push for that, and
Mm.
Virgin Airlines
Yeah. We can see
are
it.
on a push.
Mm.
Yeah, just have something that's up there that's you know floating in the cold
Yeah. Just imagine.
environment. That's what we need,
Yeah.
isn't it? Just that
Well.
ability to cool these things down.
Yeah. I imagine just putting it on top of a mountain,
Ah,
massive, one big server room. But then you've
Atlanta,
got
here we
avalanches,
come.
haven't you?
Here we
Well,
come.
that's going to be interesting. Well, yeah, but think about it. Different parts of the world would have
Yeah,
different temperatures. So I wonder if you could technically go just as further up or down on the on the Earth
yeah,
sphere and
yeah,
use that as a location to cool, as a
yeah,
way of cooling these down.
yeah,
But hey, it's not
yeah, yeah.
always
That's
be
it.
answers.
I suppose part of it is because the sovereign land and the laws, and where that data is actually stored. There's a
Yes.
lot of compliance
Mm.
to do with data storage and
Mm.
who owns your data. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's interesting.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation again.
You're welcome.